and that we actually don't evolve through genetic manipulation at all. We don't evolve through hybridization. That is a lie that darker entities tell humanity so that they can enter into the life wave of the planet. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, and thank you so much for joining me today. I am going to be answering a question that has been appearing underneath a bunch of different Facebook posts or underneath my YouTube videos, especially pertaining to Mars mysteries. And that question is, are you saying that humans were not genetically engineered? What about evidence of gene manipulation? And this is a very good question. This is a great question, and I'm very glad that you guys have asked this because it's opening up the opportunity for us to have a really deep conversation about human creation and human evolution, planetary evolution. The exact conversation that we need to understand if we want to grasp what our origins are. So there are fundamentally two aspects of human creation, and these sort of two elements or two aspects can create what is called a progressive evolutionary cycle, or organic growth, or organic development. And then there's another element within nature that is regressive, that is can also be understood as inorganic, synthetic. It's imbalanced and it's unnatural. So in other words, there is a healthy path and technique for human evolution and spiritual laws around that. And then there's also the divergency from that, creating a synthetic path of evolution or an unholy path. And with that comes various different, I guess you could say, to just be very clear, unholy forms or degraded forms. Okay, so what we really have to understand is that there is an organic and healthy evolutionary path, and then there is a regressive path. Now, this is something that a lot of people, I think, in the New Age don't like, just because the New Age is so driven by escapism and feeling good, and sometimes even Luciferianism, that really getting into the nitty-gritty of cosmic law, of universal law, of the shadow, of the darker elements of this field is something that a lot of people feel very unprepared for. But it doesn't change that this is still something that needs to be discussed if you actually want to engage with these concepts honestly. So, in one respect, we can also say that our idea about our creation determines what our future is, or what our future timeline is. Okay, so what we think about who we are and how we came to be in this body, how this body even developed, and how this planet even formed. What we think about that, what we believe about that, determines what our future trajectory is. It determines the kind of future that we are creating. Okay, it determines what our soul is, in a sense, binding itself to in future lives or in future forms. Okay, so with spiritual knowledge and with existence comes responsibility, the responsibility to understand this. Okay, so I like to sort of, when it comes to the idea of genetic manipulation, there is something going on here that is really can be seen as creating a divergent form. And when you hear about when you look into like ancient astronaut theory and various different popular television shows and streaming platforms and in ufology and on the lecture circuit and best-selling books, one of the things that's always talked about is that alien beings are gods. And not only are they gods, they created us. And they created us because they did this genetic splicing. Okay, and then that's all that's really said about it. There's not really anything else that's discussed. It's just this very limited perspective on human creation and human evolution. It's just like these alien gods came and they did that, and that's it. And this, in a sense, is either purposefully or non-purposefully lying by omission, because these narratives leave out perhaps the most important timeline of mankind, the most important history of mankind, and maybe even the most important teaching of mankind when it comes to understanding our identity and how we evolve, which is that there is what is called a holy human form, or the holy human form, which is what we have, which is the organic human form. Now, this organic human form, I'm using the word organic very purposefully, because the organic human form is very special because it has evolved over many, 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 many different cycles of cosmic evolution. So the human form that we have now is primarily a holy form. It is primarily and fundamentally a holy form. That is the highest truth. That is the realest truth. And anything that's going on with genetic modification or anything like that is not creating a form. It is modifying our holy form. Okay, so any conversation about interdimensional beings or alien beings being creators is too far. Any kind of conversation about alien beings being hybridizers and that we evolve through hybridization and genetic splicing, that's too far. That is too far, because now we're starting to apply godlike powers, the power to evolve a human being spiritually, the power to create a human being. We're now applying these God powers that are beyond any physical being at all, beyond any individuated being, that is purely mostly understood as cosmic rhythms that we adhere to and embody. We're now applying all of that to an individual, a being, an alien being from another planet. So not only is that metaphysically wrong, it's also dangerous, because now people begin outsourcing their spiritual power to these alien beings. And because humanity has been altered or interfered with over time, then it seems to support this sort of lower, most degenerate version of human history and human creation. So let's go a little bit deeper in this and understand more. So the organic human form is holy, and it is holy because within you, within your beautiful form, is every single evolution that's ever been in the solar system. That is within you. That's why when you read esoteric literature, it's the kingdom of heaven is within, to go within. Not without to other beings, but it's within you. And the reason why it can even possibly be within us is because we have evolved with the cosmos, with the solar system, over a very long period of time. Specifically, I go into this in various lectures that I will link below. But the long story short of it is that we go through periods of evolutions. And the first part of our evolution as a planet and as a human is actually descending into matter. And this is referred to in ancestral traditions, but also in the Bible as well, but also in Eastern mysticism. There's many ancestral traditions that say the same stuff. But basically the idea of the fall. There's also many different fairy tales that talk about this. In my last video, I talked about Persephone and her descent into the underworld, and Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole, and the descent of Inanna, and really the descent of the goddess. That's what this is symbolized by, because the feminine is materialization, it's densification. So humanity has fallen into matter over time. Humanity was a spiritual form. This was once a completely spiritual form, more like a gas or more like a kind of warmth. And over an incredibly long period of time, we began to get denser and denser and denser over many cycles of evolution. And every time we got denser, we would incorporate something new and we would release something. And that is our perfection. And now that we're on Earth, which is the densest planetary sphere, in our solar system thus far, we have this very physical, perfected being. But make no mistake, every organ that you have, your nervous system, everything about you was once just an impulse and had to physicalize. So the human being is quite literally fell into matter. And this is also why our ancestors had a cyclical view of time. They did not view time in a linear way. Take a look at the Mayan calendar. It's circular, it's cyclical. You know, take a look at the Hindu systems, the ancient Hindu systems of time, they're circular. It's only now that we've entered this materialist age that we're suddenly looking at ourselves in a very detached way. And we're not looking at the whole picture. We're thinking that we're thinking in terms of like 6,000 years of humanity. That's a joke. That is a literal joke. It's just materialism, it's reductionism, and it is what the mind does when it has fallen into a scientific materialist perspective and no longer understands how to interact with the spiritual world. So they say it doesn't exist. Okay, that's what's going on there. And so we have this holy form, and this is what we genuinely are. And no matter what beings come and try to do genetic modification on us, the holy form is always at the basis of who and what we are. So there is no creation of humanity. And there also is no creation of humanity from apes. There was one line very, very, very long time ago where there was like an ape-like species that was created from a very futuristic species. But I will get into this later in Mars Mysteries because I don't want to derail this conversation. But what I'm trying to portray here is that to say that human beings were created by aliens and that's it is lying by omission, either purposefully or non-purposefully. That's what that is, because it's not giving the whole story that the human being is a holy being. And this is also why the human form has been overlaid with the cosmos so many different times, with the zodiac, and why the body is called the temple. All of that is telling us that we are divine by nature. We are the embodiment of the cosmos, okay? So now let's get into the idea of where this genetic manipulation came in, or what is very common in the New Age, this hybridization program began. Let's get into that now. So during every single epoch of time, during every single planetary cycle, if you will, there are two basic ages that occur. There's sort of more of a golden age or a high time of spiritual development, and there is what is called a dark age. The dark age is often associated in Hindu mysticism as the Kali Yuga or the Iron Age or the Dark Age. And then the higher age is the Golden Age. And these ages have completely different qualities. The human being is different in each of these ages. It represents a rise out of matter or an ascension and then a descension into matter. You know, so the human form isn't even technically the same form in each of these ages. And during the dark age of human development, what happens is the earth completely changes in density, as I've mentioned, gets heavier. The human form begins to shift as well. It begins to get a little bit denser. And then spiritually, humanity will get visitations from beings that represent their lowest urges or that represent their shadow. So in other words, how the cosmos works and how interdimensional beings actually come to the earth and can perceive the earth and even interact with us is that it's like a mirror. In order for an interdimensional being to actually perceive the earth and actually see us and communicate with us, we have to have something inside of us that resonates with that being. And at the heart of it, because everything is interconnected, those beings can be properly seen esoterically as another aspect of ourselves. That's how you have to view that. To view them as being completely separate and from other star systems that have nothing to do with the earth except for proximity or being from the same physical place also is a misnomer, and due to intense materialism of the mind that cannot see the interconnectivity of all different beings and things in the cosmos, and also not understanding that there is a point where time doesn't even exist in the same way and it's just basically different densities, if this makes sense. So basically, during this dark age of humanity, humanity becomes open to interference from what I would call lower astral beings. In the past, these beings would be called demonic or demons or dark entities. But now, in the phase that we are in, because the language always evolves, we would see these beings as being aliens. And we would also see these beings as just lower astral creatures. We may see them as kind of chimeric entities. We may see them as spirits or kind of darkness. But interdimensional beings includes aliens, okay? But it also includes sort of anything that's really trapped in that lower astral plane. And so during the dark age, humanity is subject to lower astral entities, to negative extraterrestrial beings, to what are called fallen angels, to beings that are within the Antichrist timeline, to beings that are within the lower astral timeline. I don't care what language you want to use. Beings within the lower astral plane and the darker timelines of humanity, or the dark timeline of humanity, become accessible to the planet. The thing that these beings want to do more than anything is to bind and merge their DNA with humanity's DNA. The reason why they want to do that is because when you enter the inorganic timeline, when you enter that dark timeline, that degenerative way of being, you begin to, over time, you begin to deteriorate as a soul essence, and you begin to fragment. Okay, if you consciously choose in many different lives to adhere to unnatural laws and work against yourself and not understand that your Christ consciousness is within you and adhere to that, then you will begin to break down. The freedom that we have to become masters in this time and in our experience comes with the ability to also degenerate and lose ourselves, okay? That is the point of the power. You can't have one without the other. The power to have massive evolution and become a master comes with the risk of losing it all and degenerating yourself until your soul is unrecognizable and damaged and can be broken up, okay? Not a comfortable topic that people like to talk about. So the thing that these darker interdimensional beings will do is they will bind their DNA with the inhabitants of this planet. And the goal there is to try to buy more time to enter the life wave of this planet so that they don't degenerate and so that they can try to fix the mistake that they've made. Now, how this can be done, how there can be healing for these types of beings will have to take place in another video, because there is a distinct path of regeneration. But I can tell you one thing: it is certainly not raping, it is certainly not stealing the genetics of people, and it is certainly not working with people against their will. It is not that. So we have to understand that, because there's a lot of propaganda that exists in the spiritual field that basically says that this kind of stuff is okay. And this, again, the higher path, we're not understanding what the holy form is, that we are divine beings, and that is primarily what we are, and that we actually don't evolve through genetic manipulation at all. We don't evolve through hybridization. That is a lie that darker entities tell humanity so that they can enter into the life wave of the planet, because they do not have a future. They have reached an evolutionary dead end because of how evil they have been. Okay? I'm using very simple words here so that we can just understand what's going on. So this is something that we have to understand about lower astral beings or darker beings, is that they do need to live parasitically off of humanity. And that is something that higher, more angelic beings, higher humans, they don't need to do that. They actually function within a completely different system of development, okay? So let me just see if I've left anything out here. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about how we genuinely spiritually evolve here, because we've just discussed how we don't evolve and sort of the challenge to discern what is healthy connection with spiritual entities and what is unhealthy. But let's talk about how humanity genuinely evolves, okay? So how the human form evolves is through integration. So how the human form evolves is through transmutation of our darkness into light. And that actually is what lights up DNA, or evolves us, or evolves our form, okay? So how we actually evolve is through an inner process. An inner process is how we evolve. And just by messing around with somebody's like DNA or genetics, that is complete, that is actually, if you want to know, that is actually what started the whole negative timeline, or the whole degeneracy of these beings, is the belief that they can just do a spiritual feat by affecting DNA physically. That leads to things like eugenics and a bunch of things I'm going to get into a little bit later in Mars Mysteries. But you cannot create a spiritual impulse. You cannot create spiritual evolution by affecting the physical form, by affecting DNA. That's just not how we evolve. That's actually how you devolve, because there's no way that any alien entity, even one that says they're from the 240th dimension or the 240th density or whatever, you know, they don't have the capacity to have the mind of God in order to know exactly what to remove and what to light up. The only thing, the only force that has that is something much greater than any personified entity. Okay, the way that that actually happens is through a sort of higher process that is hard for us to even comprehend. So what ends up happening is when people mess with their genetics like this and they play God, they end up cutting things off that they actually need in the future. But at this point in time, they deem them as being bad or whatever. But in reality, much more in the future, you actually needed that. And that's why they degenerate. So it's actually hybridization and genetic mutation that leads to the downfall of humanity, not the rise of humanity, not the evolution of humanity, and certainly not the creation of humanity. I'm drawing a real strong line here, okay? So the human form actually evolves through transmutation. This has always traditionally been taught in various different mystery traditions, whether it's Eastern, whether it's Western, whether it's just, it was just the way that it was. And that's why various different mystery school systems had these different grades of initiation that you'd go through, because there was a way of waking up to yourself. And there was a integration process of the higher self into the being, and then the ability to radiate that. So basically you have to earn your evolution. And life after life after life, you get more and more and more spiritually evolved eventually, until you evolve with the planet out of matter, because we're also evolving with the planet as well. And a lot of these darker evolutionary periods with the genetic modification and stuff, this is like a test for us. And make no mistake that certain things going on in society now that deal with like certain types of things that can be put in the body to change the DNA and things like this, this is par for the course for the darker ages of human development, for the Kali Yuga. In every single dark age, including the dark age of Atlantis, the dark age of Mu, the dark age beyond those, and the more spiritual Polarian and Hyperborean ages, every single dark age of humanity deals with some kind of negative manipulation of the form to try to stop the human form from being able to take on the higher cosmic rays that are coming in the next era. So usually there is, in every dark age, a period of degradation of the form that many people will begin to adhere to and will take on. So what we're seeing in society with a lot of the stuff that's going on politically and socially, with the idea of changing our genetic structure, that is right on time. That is right on time for the kind of age that we are in. It's always all about messing with the holy form and introducing things to our sacred temple of a body, so that so it's very difficult to connect to source. So it's very difficult to connect to God. It's very difficult to connect with the higher realms. Now nothing can separate you from God. Nothing can separate you from your higher self. Nothing can separate you from your Christ consciousness. Nothing. But what can happen is certain things can be changed within your physical form or within your mind. Certain belief systems can be introduced that you can take on, so that you begin to reject your own spirituality, your own spirit, your own Christ consciousness. You reject it, which is basically the same effect as separating you from it. Or certain things can be introduced to the body, toxins, certain things that are put in the body with sharp objects or what have you, that actually create a competing system in the body, or change the body's genetic structure so that it becomes harder for the individual to actually sense or feel spirit. So this isn't, disconnecting you from your soul, from your spirit. This is creating certain conditions within the mind and within the body that make it very hard to sense it. And this happens at the end of every single dark age. Now, in prior ages of development that were more spiritual and we had less physical form, this wasn't done in the same way. But now that we've reached this super heavy density and we're physical beings, that's how this is manifesting. But it's the same pattern of wanting to destroy our divine form, our divine being. Okay, we have to understand that that's what's going on. This, in my opinion, is where spirituality, modern day spirituality, needs to pick up and become modern, because we can't really just wholesale apply a lot of the older teachings within spirituality to modern times. We have to pick up the pattern and we have to apply them. We have to be able to work with this information. So yeah, I think that's everything. Let me just take a look at my notes. So all evolutionary jumps are actually a metamorphosis. Human beings evolve through metamorphosis. And this metamorphosis, again, is best understood as, you know, falling into density and taking a physical form, and then rising out of density. And that's the period, that's the metamorphosis. When we come into what is known more as a golden age or a higher cycle, we actually become less dense, and our physical form kind of changes in this period of plasticity. So we have this opportunity to really change our form in certain ages due to where our mind is. And then in the denser periods of time, it's really about looking at who we are. We're not really able to change our form with our mind as much, but it's really more about going into our shadow. It's about refinement. It's about releasing what no longer serves us. And then that then creates this trajectory into the next phase of development, which will be even higher, okay? So human beings evolve over a very long period of time in different stages. This includes the physical form. Any genetic modification, any hybridization is an act of interference through fallen angels and dark entities in order to change the holy human form into something else, because they need to do that in order for them to enter the life wave of the earth, in order for them to have some kind of hope for the future. This is what they're doing, okay? And this is what, in a sense, parasitic entities always do. They live through attachment. They exist through attaching themselves to the planet, attaching themselves to human beings, and sucking human energy from them. They are parasitic. Dark entities are parasitic, and this includes aliens, okay? This includes interdimensional beings. And this includes also, you could also look at it as the degenerative or regressive timeline of mankind. Okay? Again, the higher timeline of mankind, the organic timeline, is done through inner transmutation, through facing your fears, through spiritual transmutation, which is why every single religion and mystery school was fundamentally founded on this and the different proper techniques to do that. You know, so we have lost that today. And much of the New Age is becoming a very strange space that no longer is teaching and representing classical elements of spirituality, the timeless elements of spirituality, the scientific aspect of spirituality, the spiritual science, if you will. These are being left out. A lot of the information is anecdotal. A lot of the information is pure fantasy. And in my opinion, it's not really true mysticism anymore. It's getting into very strange spaces. And so that's why I really wanted to talk about this with you, is because we need to bring the basis back. We need to bring the foundation back. Which is understanding how human beings evolve exactly, understanding how the planet evolves exactly. And this is not something that I'm simply making up. This exists in the traditional Western tradition, the Eastern tradition. These are the things that were passed down over and over and over again, is the structure of the cosmos and how we evolve. That's why most origin stories are a fall. It's literally talking about the densification of the human being into matter, and any periods of genetic modification that have existed happened during a dark age, or even the things like ideas about certain beings mating with humans and stuff like that. That can even get into this as well, is really not creation. Hybridization is not creation, and genetic modification is not creation. And I'm being very firm about this because if you believe that hybridization is creation, if you believe that genetic modification is creation, it is a genuine origin, then you are outsourcing your power. You are outsourcing your personal power to beings that are aliens or beings that are interdimensionals, to just another being, a being that is acting as a proxy for God. You know, you're giving your power away. You're binding yourself in a negative way to the lower astral plane and the entities within the lower astral plane, because creation is something that happens over a very long period of time. And you are a divine being that has been evolving via your own volition and your own power very specifically over a very long period of time, and you deserve the credit for that. And you have a divine human form that represents the cosmos. You have been evolving over a long period of time to achieve where you are today. That's the reality. And your form is sacred and your form is holy. And yes, there have been weird periods on the earth where there are dark, lower beings that can appear as physical, that try to get into your genetics, that want to bind themselves with. That is the unfortunate truth. I don't like talking about it either. But what I like a lot less is when it's starting to turn into a weird religion in the New Age and ufology. So, yes, let's start another vein of conversation. It's not about making people wrong as well. I want to be clear too that for a long time I believed this, which is why I'm so passionate about it, is that for a very long time I believed that, because out of the blue, I just started having spiritual experiences that involved cosmic entities who presented themselves as Pleiadians. And there was no support system for that. There was no one to talk to. And it was a very lonely time to be having that experience that you can't just write off. You can't say that didn't exist. And you don't have the luxury to not believe anymore. Okay? So when I did have that experience, I tried to read everything and, see what was going on. And so I read all the literature I could. Most of it was channeled. And then there was most of the scientific work was basically saying that aliens were gods. And so I believed that. I believed that we evolved through hybridization. I believed that alien beings were gods. I had a completely materialistic interpretation of spirituality. And then it just started to feel not right. It started to feel like I was giving my power away. And I started to research more classical esoterica that was timeless or from hundreds of years ago, from very old traditions. And I realized that, oh my gosh, all these different amazing spiritual teachers from our past that the New Age is quite honestly based in. The New Age would not exist without Helena Blavatsky, without Rudolf Steiner, without Manly P. Hall, and without mystics that even will go unnamed. The New Age just would not exist. Edgar Cayce, these are all great names that have formed the New Age. Also, it wouldn't exist without the incredible Eastern teachings, pure Eastern teachings as well, which are all about the cosmos. They're all about the development of the planet and the development of the human being. So the New Age wouldn't even exist without that. So I started to read into the classical stuff that wasn't just anecdotal channeled information, just a psychic sitting there channeling a being. I started to look into what are the laws of creation, what is the classical esoterica. And I started to see that, oh my gosh, these people were talking about everything that we're talking about. They just weren't using like modern language. They were still talking about beings from other spheres, planetary spheres. They were still talking about human evolution and creation, except for it was just using the language of the time. But the laws were still there. And that was just amazing to me, because I finally found that timeless thread that I was looking for from the very beginning of my journey. I was always looking for the material that I've been teaching the past few years, but I didn't find it because they didn't use the word Pleiadian. They didn't use the word extraterrestrial. They didn't use the language star seed or whatever it is. They weren't using this kind of modern esoteric language, so when I would search for things, it wouldn't appear. But this was this classical esoterica was really what I was always looking for. This structure was always what I was looking for. And so eventually I began to realize that I think as spiritual teachers, it's really not about being right all the time. It's not about being a guru. It's not about being better than everybody else or having all of the answers or being the most important person in the room. I think the era of the guru and the era of the all-knowing spiritual teacher has been gone for thousands of years. I think that what the spiritual teacher does today is actually enter into the spiritual scene exactly as it is, takes it on, is subject to it, and then builds out of it. Goes in there and tries to take what is good and develop that, but also discuss what is not healthy and why. And this actually helps to refine the New Age. It helps to refine the spiritual community and make it something that's more reasonable and that's more relatable. And this helps to make it more accessible to other people who have not maybe had crazy wild experiences but are looking to enter into the conversation, right? So fundamentally, I feel like for me, it was a very, very, very important that I believed the alien God theory. It was very important that I was entrenched in that, because now I completely understand why people believe that, but I also understand what the big picture is and where to place it. And I would not be able to create the content that I'm doing now if I was not in that belief system. And if I was not able to experience it, how it felt and what it is. And so that is truly where I'm coming from. I'm not coming as somebody who wants to know everything or, just be that person. I'm a work in progress. And this conversation was a huge part of my personal journey. Like I said, because I believed it. And yeah, I just wanted to have that conversation, because I have also noticed in the comments sometimes people will say that as though, because I believed it at one point, that I'm not allowed to say what I'm saying now. And I just want to make it very clear that, the whole point in having spiritual conversations or being a spiritual teacher is literally to enter into a difficult conversation, to enter into a certain spiritual environment, to enter directly into the spiritual culture of the time, to be in it, to get to know it, but then to be able to kind of maybe make your mark on it or be able to evolve out of it, to take what is good and to keep going with that, to refine that, but also to very clearly reject and correct what is unhealthy. And that needs to be done in every single community regularly if we want our communities to be healthy. Okay. So I'm just going to close it out here, guys, and say that both of these two impulses, the progressive, organic impulse of humanity that represents spiritual evolution, that represents physical evolution too. It represents the ascension of our form out of matter. That is a very real impulse. There's a second impulse that is degeneration. It's regressive. It's not progressive. It's regressive. It's degenerative. Okay? It is the destruction of your form. It is the destruction and fragmentation of your essence. These two impulses exist within you. They exist within the cosmos and within the planet. And we have to be able to identify each. We have to be able to identify the essence and the energy of the organic impulse, of the Christ impulse, if you will, within all of us. And then we have to identify that darker impulse, the degenerative impulse. And that impulse's projection in time, what it causes you to do if you connect with it for too long. How it changes you if you connect with it for too long. Okay, this is responsibility. Okay, we have to recognize that both of these impulses lie within each of us. And that we have a choice, and that we can even get confused about which is which, and that that's okay. And again, it is so okay to be confused about this. The most important thing is that we keep our mind open and that we are honest. That's it. That's the most amazing thing that we can do. And each person has the choice and freedom to learn about human and planetary evolution and consciously connect with the impulses and ideas that they want to create in their life. Okay? So I'm going to end this there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. It's been my absolute pleasure to connect with you today. If you do enjoy my work and you feel like it helps you in any way, I would appreciate any type of donation or support that keeps me going, that allows me to make these videos and keep them free. So I'll put the links below on how you can support me in the comments. And without any further ado, I will see you in our next video.